Welcome to the Hazmat Files. I'm your host, Erica Fisher, and in today's episode, we're stepping back to assess the big picture, the current state of hazmat response in America. We'll unpack the biggest challenges, critical trends, and what the next 5 years of hazmat response might look like. Before we introduce our guests, a quick note. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of TransCare or its sponsoring organizations. The content provided is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal or professional advice. From transportation incidents to industrial threats, lithium-ion fires to evolving chemical risks, we're asking, are we keeping up? To help answer that, we've brought together two thought leaders on the front lines of hazmat safety, Chris Hawley and Toby Frost. Chris is the COO of Emergency Management Solutions and brings decades of public safety and consulting experience. A retired firefighter and former hazmat coordinator for Baltimore County Fire Department, he has advised industrial sites, emergency management agencies, and federal law enforcement, including extensive work with the FBI on weapons of mass destruction countermeasures. As a founding partner of BlackRock 3, he has trained Fortune 500 firms in emergency resilience. A published expert in hazmat and terrorism response, Chris also teaches nationwide with the Meter Guys. Toby Frost is a retired battalion chief from the Lafayette Fire Department in Indiana, where he's led the hazmat team and founded the Illicit Lab Response Team. A seasoned instructor in fire science, technical rescue, and hazardous materials, he teaches at Purdue University and trains responders nationwide and internationally. Toby serves as a hazmat manager for FEMA INTF-1 and sits on the NFPA Hazardous Materials Committee and on the board of the Indiana Alliance of Hazardous Materials Responders. A graduate of Eastern Kentucky University and the National Fire Academy Executive Fire Officer Program, he is a nationally recognized presenter and an award-winning instructor in hazardous materials response. Let's start with the overall hazmat landscape. What's happening on the ground? What are the most frequent or concerning hazmat incidents you're seeing right now, either by volume or consequence?
For me, one of the biggest concerns I'm seeing right now is CNG. With the change to the Type 4 cylinders, our tactics have to change dramatically from what we've traditionally done for cylinder fires. And we've had a number of very close calls already across the country. I think it's this generation's version of a Blevy. People have to understand the container, and it's a different set of tactics and a different approach than what we've traditionally done, leading to a lot of close calls already.
I agree wholeheartedly with Toby. One, the number of cylinders, the number of other power systems are evolving and becoming more and more prevalent in society. And then the result of that is more accidents, more incidents. And there were recently a number of firefighters injured in LA from a massive explosion from CNG. And it's a very common incident that can occur all across the United States. And one of the issues is, you look at the incident in LA, is they're a well-trained, well-organized fire department that has a lot of resources. But there are a tremendous number of CNG vehicles moving around rural parts of the United States where they don't have those same resources, and travel times are much longer, and there's great potential for injuries and fatalities at one of these incidents.
And Toby, are there certain regions, transportation modes, or other industries seeing increased risk?
Well, I think Chris mentioned it a little bit, that in particular, these CNG cylinders or the alternative fuels will get a little bit broader because we have some other ones out there as well. LNG, liquefied natural gas, lots of stuff out there, predominantly in commercial transit. A lot of your fleet facilities are switching over to CNG. There's a lot of advantages to it, or these alternative fuels, and we're seeing it across the country. Along with that is they're starting to move it in bulk in the similar types containers. So traditionally, where we looked at major thoroughfares for commercial traffic would be a problem. Now you've got people in my area, we have farmers using liquefied natural gas for grain dryers. And if you would have asked me 5 years ago, I would have said that would never happen. It would always be propane in our area. So you're seeing this more and more in rural settings as it becomes more and more common, more and more readily available, I think we're going to see it across the country wholesale.
And Chris, I know you talked about the CNG incident in Los Angeles. Would you say that that's the most recent incident that felt like a wake-up call to the state of hazmat preparedness? Or is there another incident you feel is that wake-up call?
Well, that was certainly one of them. I mean, it highlights the alternative fuel dangers that we have. But the incident that occurred the other day, I wanted to highlight in Wilmington, North Carolina, where several firefighters were injured at a natural gas explosion. Unfortunately, we're seeing more and more of these type of incidents between natural gas and propane. And every year there's firefighters injured and killed at these incidents. And there's a pretty easy way to protect yourself from having an explosion when you arrive, and that's the use of detection devices. And there's a lot of training that needs to go on with regard to the use of detection devices and tactics used at the CNG incidents and involved LNG incidents and residential and commercial businesses that have natural gas or propane.
And Toby, has there been an incident that felt like a wake-up call to the state of hazmat preparedness on your end?
I think a big one that applies to a lot of fire departments would be the East Palestine incident. We had a lot of volunteer fire companies responding, a whole lot of assets before it was all said and done. And there were a lot of lessons learned that are a lot of items we think we've already covered as far as access to train records and assessment, who to call and incident command, and a lot of essentially what I would consider basic things, but we've slipped off that horse and people aren't really following through with it.
Next, let's talk about the people doing the work, our hazmat teams and emergency responders. Toby, how would you describe the current state of hazmat responder readiness across the U.S.?
I think that we're at a point now where at least I'm starting to see a lot of smaller departments that traditionally didn't have a hazmat response starting to integrate that as part of their basic fire response. We're seeing more and more teams that are starting to work together in regional deliveries, where we used to see that in large metropolitan areas. It's starting to spread, and it's becoming much more of a mainstay than maybe it was even 10 years ago.
And Chris, you feel departments are adequately staffed, trained, and equipped to handle modern chemical emergencies?
That is certainly one of the major challenges that we have in the United States is the staffing. And I know that in my region, they're certainly looking at innovative ways to staff and cross-staff. There are very few dedicated hazmat teams in this country, and they're predominantly located in major chemical areas of the United States. But one of the things you look at is when you have cross-trained hazmat teams, whether they're dual function or dual assigned, they're always challenged by how much time they have to do the proper training and be truly prepared for the job. And I know there's a number of jurisdictions that are looking at having cross-staffed between urban search and rescue or technical rescue, performing that function and also performing hazmat jobs. Although I think in some cases that's a good idea in some parts of the country, but if you have a busy USAR team or a busy rescue company, they can't dedicate the time and resources necessary to really fully function as a hazmat team. And on the other side of that, if their focus is hazmat, they can't focus as much on the rescue side of their jobs. So you really have to look at how you're staffed and then what you're prepared to do. And I think even in the hazmat world, there's too many things that you've got to be prepared for. And we haven't hit this topic yet, but hazmat teams have to be prepared to deal with terrorist events. How much training are they getting in that aspect of their responsibility? And now you have lithium batteries, CNG, LNG, you've got other situations going on, and there's not a lot of time for each of these teams to handle all those tasks. So staffing is definitely a challenge. One of the things that we have to look at is hazmat teams today are, I think, running less calls, but they're running more catastrophic incidents. So the risk is much higher, but the frequency is much lower. When back in a few years ago, when I was actually on the hazmat rig, we ran a lot of calls, but they were of relatively low risk. But we had situations where we didn't have very large-scale incidents. Well, today, such as in East Palestine, there's a whole lot of communities that could face that same risk, and they need to be prepared for. And it's a challenge when you don't have staffing to train and be prepared to handle those type of situations.
Toby, from your experience, what impact are staffing shortages, budget cuts, and call volume having on hazmat operations?
For a lot of teams, fire-based teams, emergency management-based teams, hazmat's a secondary function. So it's the first one to get budget cuts. And hazmat is an expensive game to play, unfortunately. The PPE is expensive. The equipment's expensive. You have to look at not simply procurement, but also being able to maintain that equipment long term. And there's not a lot of funding streams. And when you look at local departments that are already budget stressed, buying some of these big ticket items, then trying to maintain them is a massive hurdle to overcome. Grants are getting fewer and fewer. We're seeing restructuring of the grants. We're seeing reductions in the grants. A lot of teams, my team historically relied very heavily on these grants, and we keep seeing those get cut left and right. So for me, one of the huge struggles is developing some sort of reliable funding stream in our area to support the teams, because even procurement of the equipment is a hurdle, but there's no way to maintain the equipment, update the equipment, get your consumable supplies. Those just are not built into the grant programs.
Grant funding is certainly one area to tackle to help support hazmat operations and also training for first responders. One other question I have is, are regional mutual aid agreements still reliable, or are they showing strain?
We're starting to see a lot of teams that everybody is so busy now. Run volume is up. We're being pulled in more and more directions, asked to do more and more things that maybe weren't even traditionally in our wheelhouse for response. And that's causing strain on some of those relationships. So I feel like we've gone full cycle here. At one point, everybody was starting their own team, and then we started going back to more of a regional model. And then suddenly you had one agency that was doing the whole region, and that relationship starts to get strained after a while. And now we've got teams starting back up again to try to fill some of those gaps. Manpower across the country is a huge issue, whether it's hiring new people or maintaining new people. And our run volume, I feel like we're getting asked to do more and more with less. And that's starting to cause strains across the whole industry.
And hazmat is constantly evolving, even with all of those challenges. Let's talk about how the risks are continuing to change for first responders. What are some of the most significant emerging threats? We've already discussed some of those with alternative fuels such as LNG and CNG. But Chris, you had also mentioned terrorism. What are those things that first responders need to be thinking about when it comes to the risks that are changing constantly?
Well, there is no doubt that the United States is under the threat of a terrorist attack. And unfortunately, I think a lot of folks have forgotten the lessons learned from 9/11. And we're at great potential to have another major attack like that, whether it be chemical, biological, explosive, whatever happens to be. And it's lost focus. And that happened before 9/11. Even though there were folks teaching anti-terrorism and terrorism response courses, it was something that people really didn't think about. And then in 1995, the World Trade Center was bombed. People took notice that this is a great potential, but not a lot of people jumped on board. It was still a hard battle to fight to get people to do anti-terrorism and terrorism response training. And today, I look at it that even a simple situation is, and it happens frequently, it's one of the most frequent threats that occurs, is a ricin letter. How many response teams are going to be comfortable handling a ricin letter? And it's not that much of a challenge to handle a ricin letter. Ricin is an extremely toxic substance, but it has one major route of entry, and that's injection. But most hazmat teams don't understand the true risk from ricin, and they may not take what would be using a recommended practice to deal with that threat. And it doesn't need to be a major incident. Yes, it's a threatening material, but it has very specific characteristics that can be easily handled if you're properly trained to deal with it.
And Toby, from your perspective, what are some of the other most significant emerging threats that first responders face today?
I think we've seen even a change in the terrorism field. Traditionally, we'd always heard things like a bioterrorist event was difficult to produce the agent you need. And now with the internet, a lot of that stuff is readily available and you can find that information. So you no longer need a large group supporting you. These lone wolf terrorists, I think, is one of the things that scares me the most is it just takes somebody who has the resources locally anywhere, and they can find the information on the internet. You can buy just about anything on the internet now. It's spooky what you can buy, from illicit drugs to weapons to guns, you name it. It's out there and it's readily accessible. So our threat analysis, when you start looking at it, foreign actors, sure, there's lots of people watching it, but the person who's been radicalized on the internet, watching stuff on the internet, or has been disenfranchised and decides to take a dramatic step, those resources are so readily available now that I just think it makes the risk much higher for us. And Chris is mentioning white powder letters. In this year alone, there's been a huge resurgence in white powder letters. They'd kind of gone away for a while, and they're popping all over again. So a lot of the stuff we've seen before is coming back, and now it's not simply biological. It could be an envelope full of fentanyl, or it could be an envelope full of a very strong pesticide, or any other number of things. So those risks are, I think, much more prevalent now because they're so readily available.
Chris, with these risks changing and the amount of training that's required, how do you feel responders are adapting to the new chemicals and these potential hazards? Is there more training needed, and where can responders find that?
Well, one of the easy ways to get training and free training is to go to the TransCare website and look at all the available training that TransCare either coordinates, provides, or supports. And I think there's a lot of responders around the country that aren't aware of clicking on the TransCare website can gain them a whole lot of free training that is not available in a whole lot of other places. There's not a whole lot of places that'll deliver a rail car training in your backyard wherever you got a close rail siding, those types of things. But on the other side of that, the one thing that hazmat teams need to be aware of is look at themselves, examine themselves, and say, are we truly prepared for what we're being asked to do? And one of the ways to figure that out is to look at their hazmat training and say, is it compliant with NFPA 470? It's the hazmat training standard that's put out by the NFPA. If you look at all the competencies that are listed in NFPA 470, can you truly cover all those competencies? Do you truly have somebody on your hazmat team that can cover that type of response? We talked about white powder threats. Is there somebody on your team who is current and been trained in how to deal with biological threats? The other one that gets a lot of hazmat teams and gets them into trouble is radiological threats. Do you have somebody on your team who understands radiation threats? Do they know how to operate the radiation detection devices? Have they been trained to the NFPA standard to deal with radiation incidents, those types of things? So there are things that are available. It's a self-assessment that you've got to look at and say, are we truly prepared? Or are we just checking a box saying, yes, we have a hazmat team. Yes, we got hazmat technician training. But is it truly fulfilling what the NFPA intends it to be?
And Toby, what role does data and real-time situational awareness play in keeping up with these evolving threats?
Well, I'm a big believer that data is the key to a lot of things. And one example I'll give is we hear a lot of talk about EV fires. Unfortunately, we don't have any solid data on how many EV fires there really are. It's very ad hoc. You have certain agencies here and there that have collected it. With the transition to the new fire data system, we'll be able to capture some of that data, but we're making decisions based on hearsay for the most part, anecdotal stories. And without that data, we're just kind of guessing. So we tend to jump from one thing to another without solid data to say we have this many of those types of calls or this many responses that deal with that. And there's a big argument back and forth. One of the things with the internet now is an event happens and it's instantly in front of everybody, right? We see it on social media. We see it in newsletters, and a single incident can get blasted across and seem like it's a much bigger issue than maybe it really is. Without data, we don't know how relevant some of that stuff really is. But along with that, because of the internet, no one's alone. When you encounter an event, there's a number of blogs and discussion groups and social media groups that you can jump on and say, hey, we just encountered this. Has anybody encountered it? How have you dealt with it? How often do you see it? So the flip side of that same coin is that we can get in-time feedback from other agencies across the country, sharing that information so that we're all on the same page. I think it's a double-edged sword. Sometimes things become a much bigger deal than maybe they statistically really are. But on the other hand, we can get answers very quickly and talk about who's doing what and how they're doing it and how they're addressing some of these emerging threats.
So where do we go from here with these risks that we've discussed? Let's shift into solutions. I know we've already discussed some of the changes to the grant funding programs to better support hazmat teams. But Chris, what's one area where you believe we can move the needle quickly? Is it training, funding, partnerships, or more hazmat awareness?
Well, I think it's a combination. Obviously, I'm a big advocate for more training and to make sure that your teams are truly prepared for not only the everyday hazards that they face, but the unusual risks, the low frequency but high effect incidents that they may be faced with. And you've got to be prepared to deal with those kinds of things. And you look at having an effective training program. Do you have regular training? Do you have interesting training? Do your folks want to go to training? And the answer should be to that question, yes, they want to go to training because they're interested in it. It's exciting. It's something that they're definitely going to think that this was value added for them in their positions. And you look at that. But the other side of that is partnerships, is looking at who can you partner with. Toby mentioned mutual aid agreements. Those are certainly important. I was very lucky in the Baltimore area. We had a tremendous number of hazmat teams that we could call on a regular basis, and they would be there quickly. We all trained together. We all worked together, so it was very beneficial. But we also had a great partnership with industry, and we had an industrial mutual aid group in Baltimore, and there's a number of them around the country. But we had access to a large number of industrial assets that a lot of teams didn't have access to. So that was a partnership that had been developed over the years, and we had access from, you name it. If we needed 10,000 pounds of soda ash, that was one phone call away or one radio call away to get that resource that we needed. If we needed a chemist, we needed a backhoe, whatever we needed, we didn't have it within our fire department. We got it through industry, and it was greatly advantageous to us and saved us a tremendous amount of money. Yes, we stockpiled a large amount of foam for various incidents, but we also had industrial partners that had a tremendous amount of foam that if we needed more, we could always get more.
And Toby, beyond grant funding, is there one area where you believe we can move the needle quickly to help support hazmat teams and first responders?
Very much like Chris, I think the fastest way to move that needle is partnerships and leveraging what's in your area. My example is we have a large pharmaceutical manufacturer in our area that we train with on a regular basis. It started out, we trained with them to respond to their facility, but they have a lot of things they can bring to the table. My team will never have a chemical engineer on our team. It's just not going to happen. We're a fire-based team. We're not that big of an agency. However, I could call this manufacturer and say, we have this problem. Their chemical engineers can work with us. So almost like a force multiplier, reaching outside what I would consider traditional avenues. On a fire-based system, we're used to working with police and EMS, EMAs a little bit, but looking at some of the national assets, your National Guard teams, whether it's the civil support teams, SURF-P, CBRF, if that's in your area, some of these military-based WMD teams, because at the end of the day, we're doing the same job. WMD response or hazmat essentially comes down to the same type of tools and responses. So if we can use that as a force multiplier, I don't have to have everything, but I have to know who to call when I need that. So looking at non-traditional roles, a lot of teams don't work with their bomb squad. But if the bomb squad has a chemical dispersion device, they're going to be calling hazmat at some point. So why not take advantage of that on the front end? And when we start looking at multiple spots for resources, we start to tap other funding sources that maybe we don't have from a traditional standpoint. My former fire department just was responding with a large cold storage facility, and they were doing a major remodel, and we had done multiple training drills with them over the time. And they came to us and said, hey, we're going to shut down and redo this whole system. We know we're going to have problems. What can we do to help you guys be prepared to respond when we start having leaks and problems when we come back online? And a lot of that was because of the early legwork done, just trying to reach out and train with them. And like Chris said, by training at a facility, it's way more fun than make believe on the fire training ground. Hey, this gasoline tanker is a chlorine tanker today. What would you do? When I can go to industry and they've got the real thing and the real products, and we can train in the real environment that we'll actually respond to. Most industries required by their insurance carrier to do at least an annual drill, and they're more than willing to have you in if you reach out and do a little bit of that legwork. And then once we're comfortable with each other, if I need help or I need a resource, I can call them and say, hey, I know you guys have chemical XYZ. We just encountered it. Here's my problem. Can you give me some resources or recommendations? So again, unusual relationships as a force multiplier, reaching outside our comfort zone, even working with federal law enforcement. A lot of people don't think about going the next step. If you're in a major metropolitan area like Chris was, you work with the FBI all the time. But a lot of jurisdictions don't know who their WMD coordinator is. And if we have a really bad day, you're going to need to know who that person is. So I really think you can, with little investment other than time, reaching out to non-traditional resources and trying to build some of those relationships is a huge game changer.
I think you are both spot on when it comes to discussing partnerships, and partnerships being that bridge that can help close some of the gaps in hazmat response. Toby, are there any programs or models at a local or national level that are getting it right when it comes to hazmat response?
I'll tell you, one of the models I really like a lot is the regional state level programs where you have local jurisdictions that man a state level response, much like what you'll see in Massachusetts or Texas or Florida. There's several other states out there. The funding is obviously a huge issue, and you can't afford to have every team in your state necessarily as a type 1 team. But if you can have the state providing some of that funding and some of those resources, then the teams can come together as a regional model to fill those voids. I really like those models. It seems to be very successful. All those jurisdictions that are running that, it seems to work very well. For example, in Indiana, we would only need 4 or 5 caches or regional teams to make that model viable, as opposed to 40 for every career fire department. It's a way of stretching that dollar for bigger impact, bigger return on the investment for the state with that regional response model.
And Chris, I know we've talked about partnerships and how they are a bridge to help filling some of the gaps in hazmat response. Do you have any other recommendations on how we can build a stronger, more connected hazmat response system across both public and private sectors?
Well, one of the things, and Toby mentioned the regional concept, and that's an excellent way to start the discussion within your own community. But one of the things that hazmat teams need to think about is how do they get involved? How do they get involved with their local industry? Every community has to have a local emergency planning committee. Every state has to have a state emergency response committee. Is the hazmat team, team leader, team officers, even somebody on the team, are they involved with that process? Do they even know who's on their local emergency planning committee, on their LEPC? And that's another potential area for suggestions for funding. You go to your LEPC and say, look, folks, we're struggling. We need assistance. How can we partner to make something happen that we can work together? But it also helps develop relationships. So when you have non-emergency meetings and you have situations where you're in a comfortable environment, that pays extreme benefits when you're having a really bad day. So when you have that ability to talk with your local emergency planning committee, your local industry, do you reach out to, if you've got chemical facilities that have extremely hazardous substances on the EPA list, how often do you get to those facilities? Do you know those people? The hazmat team should be making regular visits to those facilities. And as Toby mentioned, running exercises, they're required. So you want to run exercises with those facilities. You want to know what capabilities they have, and you want to make your people aware of what's going on at a particular facility. So there are ways that local teams can get involved with resources within their community.
Before we close, I'd love to hear a final thought from each of you. What's one misconception people still have about hazmat that needs to change? Toby, we'll start with you and then have Chris answer as well.
I think that one of the big misconceptions is that hazmat is only going to deal with spills. The traditional view of a tanker spill or an acid spill or something like that, our response obligations in the hazmat community have become so diverse, from alternative fuels and batteries and energy, radiation, biological. It really is become very broad spectrum, and our target list has become so big, it's become a profession in and of itself. I think it started out early as an ancillary for a lot of people, but there's so much out there and there's so many areas that you get engaged in that it has grown tremendously. And I think that's one of the big differences.
Toby mentioned that hazmat teams have got a whole lot of responsibility, and they do. I mean, there's the whole spectrum of things that a hazmat team is expected to handle. The hard question is, do they truly have the capability to handle all those situations? When I started as a firefighter, I enjoyed firefighting. I enjoyed the challenge of battling a fire. When I found out about hazmat, I found out that's even more of a challenge. Typical fire may involve one house, one building, maybe a couple houses, couple buildings, except for the Great Baltimore Fire. It's not a catastrophic event for the whole community. There are exceptions, obviously, with Hawaii and California, things of that nature. There are rare events that impact the entire community or a large portion of the community. But when you look at a hazmat team, they have situations, and you go back to 2005 in Graniteville, South Carolina, there's an incident where a rail incident impacted a large number of people, killed 9 people, and injured hundreds of people, and greatly impacted the community for many, many miles. And you've got to have a hazmat team that is prepared to deal with that challenge. And are they trained and equipped and prepared to deal with that situation?
Chris, if you had a direct line to every fire chief, county official, and hazmat coordinator in the country, what's one message you'd want to deliver?
Well, I'd love to give a fire chief a magic wand and say, what do you want those folks to do? What are you expecting them to do? And I had a county executive tell me one time, I just want this problem to go away. I just want it to disappear. And my answer to him was, I don't have the equipment to make this problem go away. So at that point, he said, what do you need? And I said, this is what I need. And he wrote the check. I will say I'm very thankful that he wrote the check. But I would love to go to a fire chief or county official, state official, mayor, whoever, and say, what do you expect them to do? What do you realistically want them to do? And then are you prepared to pay to make that happen? And then usually that answer is no. There's a lot of communities in this country that need a fully dedicated staffed hazmat team. Doesn't have to be a large number of people, but there should be a dedicated crew dealing with those daily problems that those communities have. But that costs a lot of money. And there's a whole lot of things a dedicated team can do. We talked about the partnerships with industry training and outreach, things of that nature, but it costs a lot of money.
And Toby, what would be one message you'd like to deliver?
I think much like Chris, a lot of people like to say they have a hazmat team, but are they really prepared? Are they willing to put in the investment? And much like Chris said, what are your expectations? What do you expect us to handle? And I can go back to my department. We started a hazmat team because we had an incident that we, as an agency, thought we could handle and we could not. And the fire chief said, that's not going to happen again. So we stood up a hazmat team very quickly to address those threats and needs. But they're always there. They're always changing. Are you willing to put the work in to meet those needs and those hazards to be prepared? And I think it goes back to earlier when we were talking about partnerships and getting the word out and trying to stretch. We as an industry have to advocate for ourselves. We've got to get out there and let people know, meet people, whether you're at, Chris mentioned the LEPC or the State Emergency Response Commission, getting to those meetings so people know you're there. If they don't see you, they don't know you're there. You might be on a list, a piece of paper somewhere, but if they see you once a month or once a quarter, however they meet, they get to know you, they know you're there, and you come to the forefront. And we can even leverage that more. Local industry has safety committees, safety teams, safety meetings they do industry level or municipality wide. Go to those meetings. We've got to market ourselves. I don't like the idea to say that we're selling ourselves, but people have to know what we do, what we want to do, what we can't do, There's a lot of expectations that are outside of what people have a vision of what a hazmat team is, and that team may not be equipped for it. If it's a strictly volunteer team, there's going to be a while for them to get off of work or come from home, pick up the trucks, get out there, and you have to have reasonable expectations of what that response is really going to be and what can you really handle. It's easy to talk about it, but doing it and investing in it's a whole bigger step.
Hazmat readiness is all about, as you both have mentioned, partnerships, the people behind it, and the commitment to being ready. And of course, as we've said, funding. Departments, county officials, and hazmat teams have to have the adequate funding, staffing, and identify the capabilities that their team can handle. To our guests, Chris and Toby, thank you for your insights and your leadership. We appreciate you both being here today and sharing your thoughts and your time, and of course, your extensive experience in hazmat. To our listeners, stay safe, stay ready, and we'll see you next time on the Hazmat Files.